guys, welcome to the Bill Barnwell Show. I am Bill Barnwell, and yes, if you're listening to this on your podcast feed, you may have heard we are now on YouTube as well. Yes, the first podcast to make it to YouTube. Nope, many have done it. We are also one of those. We are now on YouTube with each and every show, so you can watch my conversation with our guest. This week, our guest is going to be, in a moment, Mike Clay, the excellent ESPN analyst. We're going to talk about some players we still believe in. We have not given up the faith after 2 weeks in these wide receivers and running backs, including a wide swath of running backs who maybe have been a little disappointing through 2 weeks, but you should still be keeping the faith in for your fantasy team or perhaps your real-life favorite football team. But first, I wanted to give you a quick thought on a player whose usage and perhaps his future seems like it's being unfairly discussed after 2 games. And you can probably suspect who I am talking about. It is, yes, the player who has gone from NFC Player of the Week in Week 1 to maybe he should be benched, and maybe he's secretly being benched by the Vikings in Week 2, and that is their young quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. And I feel like I'm a little crazy with this one, because I feel like I've been in a very consistent place with J.J. McCarthy through 2 weeks. I see him as a young quarterback who's going to need a lot of help from his run game, as he did at Michigan, of course, who's still going to be figuring things out, but who has great receivers, although Jordan Addison is suspended to start the year. But Justin Jefferson is a very good place to start. A offensive line that has a lot of talent, but they're still sort of coming together, and now there's some injuries up front. A great coordinator in Kevin O'Connell who's going to put him in positive situations, but not a quarterback who is going to immediately burst onto the NFL and look like Patrick Mahomes in his second season after he sat most of his rookie year. And both weeks, I feel like I've been crazy, because after Week 1, it was the NFC Player of the Week, the best player by definition in the NFL, or in the NFC. And I don't think everyone thought that about J.J. McCarthy, but there was a lot to like. He was excellent in the fourth quarter of that game, hitting throws in stride, making smart decisions. He has that zone read for a touchdown. Felt like he fit right into the offense. And then Week 2, he struggles. And even though we know he now played part of that game with a high ankle sprain, which is going to hurt your accuracy, going to hurt your movement, now J.J. McCarthy is secretly, quietly being benched by the Vikings for Carson Wentz. Number one, that's not true. The Vikings are not benching J.J. McCarthy. That is not anything that is happening here. I do believe he has a real injury. I think there was a 0% chance the Vikings would be benching J.J. McCarthy if it were not for this high ankle sprain, especially when the alternative is Carson Wentz, who just signed with them just before the season. It's not like they have a Sam Darnold or even a Daniel Jones on the bench behind J.J. McCarthy. So no, that is not what's happening here. We can put that one to the side. We are good with that argument. Should you be wildly disappointed with J.J. McCarthy? Is it time to think that J.J. McCarthy is not the quarterback of the future for the Minnesota Vikings? You're entitled to think whatever you like. I would say it's a little too early to feel that way. And leaving those polar opposites aside, in reality, J.J. McCarthy has not been good. He has a 20.3 QBR through 2 weeks. That is one of the worst marks in football, one of the lesser marks for any quarterback making their first 2 NFL starts since 2007, which is when QBR was created. And yet, look at some of the players from the past in their 2 starts. Matt Ryan was at a 30 QBR through 2 starts. Bo Nix last year at a 30 QBR through 2 starts, and really bad through his first 5 starts, if I'm not mistaken. A lower first down rate on his throws than Deshaun Watson, who was maybe actively tanking the Cleveland Browns. I'm not totally sure what Deshaun Watson was doing last year, but that's where Bo Nix was through 5 games. By the end of the year, Broncos fans are thrilled he's leading them to a postseason spot. Jordan Love, a player who sat early in his career, a 33 QBR through his first 2 starts. Lamar Jackson, same thing, in the 30 range. I think right around 30 or 31 in his first 2 starts with the Ravens, although did win a bunch of games early in his career. J.J. McCarthy is a work in progress. The pick 6, the worst play he's had so far through 2 weeks, that pick 6 against the Bears. Not a great throw, but Justin Jefferson came out after the game and said, you know what, it's on me. I ran my route, cut off my route too short. That's my fault, not J.J. McCarthy's fault. I don't think Justin Jefferson is lying. I don't think he's coming out and doing that to protect a quarterback if that was a bad throw. And you saw later in that same game, J.J. McCarthy ripped a deep out that was successful and on time. I do think there's stuff to like about what we saw from him through 2 games. We saw him bounce back after what was frankly a really rough start against the Bears. And overall, more than anything, I would say this, it's been 2 games. It feels like forever. It's the only 2 games we have to work with off of his sample so far. But by the end of the year, 2 games will feel like nothing. 2 games will feel like totally irrelevant in terms of evaluating him and his broader performance as a whole. Unless there's something that we don't know or something that is really clear about J.J. McCarthy that is missing from his tape on the first 2 games of the year, I think he looks like a young quarterback who is going to need maybe a little more help than Vikings fans would like. They're going to have to get their run game going. He really improved dramatically in that first game. Once the running game did start to get going, I think having a little more Jordan Mason, I should say, is going to help. I do think that Jordan Mason has looked a lot better as a runner than Aaron Jones, who's now on injured reserve for 4 weeks. As long as the run game is working, as long as Justin Jefferson is there, he's going to have Jordan Addison when he comes back after this high ankle sprain. I do think J.J. McCarthy is going to be okay. And then I will finish up with this. The big picture, the Sam Darnold discussion. Should the Vikings have kept Sam Darnold? Remember the difference financially between those 2 quarterbacks. Sam Darnold making between $30 and $40 million a year, depending on how much you want to consider the cash versus the cap, how much of the guarantee you want to figure in. But basically a 1-year deal in about the $35 million range. J.J. McCarthy, 2nd year of his rookie deal, making a fraction of that. It's not just Sam Darnold versus J.J. McCarthy. It's Sam Darnold versus J.J. McCarthy, who is going to be there either way, and adding Will Fries to play guard, and bringing back Byron Murphy at cornerback. It is a couple more Pro Bowl caliber players at their respective positions in terms of what the Vikings got to spend by moving on from Sam Darnold, letting him leave, potentially getting a comp pick, and using J.J. McCarthy as their starting quarterback. So yes, if you want to say the Vikings should have brought in a better backup, and remember, they did try to sign Daniel Jones before he went to the Colts and apparently became the best quarterback in football. If you want to say they should have brought in more behind J.J. McCarthy than Carson Wentz, I'm not going to argue with you. I think that's totally reasonable to say. But if you want to give up and say J.J. McCarthy has no hope of being the franchise quarterback and the Vikings need to find a solution, and they were clearly wrong to move on from Sam Darnold, I just don't think you can say that after 2 weeks. So having said that, I am sure Carson Wentz is going to look like a superstar in Kevin O'Connell's offense and make J.J. McCarthy look like an absolute waste of a draft pick. But thankfully, we can move on to a smarter conversation with one of the smartest people at ESPN. All right, joining me now here on the Bill Barnwell Show. Very excited to have this man back. I've not had him on in a while. You all know him, of course, from the Fantasy Focus podcast, his excellent writing, a man who's a legend in the fantasy football industry, one of the smartest people out there, one of the most successful fantasy players of all time, I feel like, in many ways. Here to talk about some of the players, as I mentioned earlier, that we still believe in. After 2 weeks, we are not letting our preseason priors go on these players. It is my friend Mike Clay. Mike, how are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm always great after these introductions. Although when you say I'm a legend, I just turned 40, so that stings a little more than it used to. I'm starting to get up there a little bit, but I appreciate that. So here we go. We're into week 3, like you said. We're in it. We got it's not just that 1 week sample size. We have 2 now, which is in the NFL that's a lot. That's a huge sample. So a lot to dig through and work through and try to figure out what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and it's always that balance, right? Like we talked a little bit about this with Ben Gretsch last week on the show, talking about what mattered in week 1 and what didn't matter in week 1. And I thought a good point he brought up is that you don't want to overreact to what you saw in week 1 and in week 2 as well, but you don't want to underreact as well. I mean, there are opportunities out there where if a guy gets off to a hot start and you do believe in him, well, that might be the opportunity to land on, and you might get a guy who is a league winner for you. And yet you also want to flip it and say maybe some people are not necessarily going to be, league winners despite what they did in the first 2 weeks of the year. I don't want to pick on Daniel Jones. I don't know if Daniel Jones is going to be the best quarterback in football over the rest of the season, but who knows? I mean, I feel like you're so thoughtful about sort of picking apart what matters and doesn't matter, sort of picking apart the underlying responsibilities. As someone who does projections, I think you really understand the sort of the philosophy of, okay, what am I building that's sticky? What's not sticky? What's sustainable? And that really matters in real football and in fantasy football and in evaluating some of these players. And so I really wanted to have you on just talk about the guys you feel like, even though you've watched them for 2 weeks, maybe they haven't lived up to expectations, you still believe in. I'm going to have some myself, but Mike, let's start with you. Give me a player you really still believe in after maybe an underwhelming first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, so I think a guy that jumps off the page, and mostly because we just had a little fun with this on the Focus podcast, is Marvin Harrison Jr. He did have a good week one. So he came out, he had the 5 for 71 and a touchdown, but only 6 targets. So there's some reason for optimism there. And then week 2, back to earth, 27 yards on 5 targets. So, there are some negatives here, obviously the overall volume, but you look a little closer. Like you said, we can dig in deeper than just the stat line, right? Arizona, believe it or not, has run the fourth game script adjusted 4th pass heaviest offense in the NFL so far, which is interesting. A little bit of a change for them. We know they're fast paced out there to some extent. But the problem is the reason the volume's been so low for Marvin Harrison is the Cardinals have led on 70% of their snaps. That's 3rd highest in the NFL and unusual for the Cardinals. We haven't really seen this from them, and I don't expect that to kind of sustain itself going forward this season. This is a team that's going to be in more competitive games. They play the 49ers this week. I would expect this to be a game potentially that's 50-50 or they're trailing throughout. I felt that they were a sleeper team and the defense is much better this year, and that's fine. But the bottom line is they're not going to be leading at the 3rd highest rate in the NFL on 7 out of every 10 snaps they play on offense. So Bill, we need a larger target share from Marvin Harrison Jr. You don't take him with the top 5 pick and give him a 21% target share. So that needs to go up, but he is on the field for 90% of their snaps. There's, I feel like, at least some sort of conceded effort to get him the football. So I think when they start throwing the ball more, we could potentially get to that ceiling we want from Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, I mean, I would love, as someone who picked the Cardinals to make the playoffs, I'd love if they got to play the Saints and the Panthers every week. They do not. The schedule's going to get tougher for Arizona. Did just lose a couple of defensive backs, like Garrett Williams, who's excellent, really good cornerback, is going to be on IR. Walt Johnson, who's been very good so far this year as a rookie, don't know if he's going to be active this week, so there's going to be a less successful defense maybe. That could lead to more of a shootout, maybe more success for opposing passing attacks when they play Arizona. And I'm going to talk about this with maybe a couple guys, or maybe some of the discussions we have here during this conversation. You want to strike a balance with draft capital and pedigree coming into the NFL. And it feels like maybe it's been a little over a year since Marvin Harrison came in the NFL. I know that feels like forever. It is such a short period of time. Some of these guys don't break out immediately. And so I think there's this natural instinct to be like, well, people are wrong about him in the draft. He's not, a superstar prospect wideout. That is not going to happen. Sometimes it works that way. Sometimes the guy in the top 5 does not turn out to be a superstar. Other times those guys take a year, they take 2 years. It's so variable from player to player. And so I think maybe we've been a little spoiled by the Justin Jeffersons of the world, the Jamar Chases of the world, where they were just phenoms from early in September onward. Although I guess just Jefferson did have those first 2 weeks where he didn't do very much, and then he got in the lineup.
Exactly.
But breakout from there. But I just think the pedigree still means something to me. It still means something that he was such a highly regarded prospect, and maybe he's not getting the target share we like, but can he be more efficient on the targets he gets? Can we have more games like week 1 where he catches a long fade for a touchdown? I do think there's still a really good player there.
Yeah, I mean, you look at end zone targets, air yards. Last year, they were massive numbers. He scored 8 touchdowns. I mean, he had a middle of the, we'll say relative to wide receivers selected in the first round. He was kind of middle of the pack. It wasn't like a disaster. The problem was we had such a high expectation for him immediately. If we treated him, like Teteroa McMillan or Travis Hunter or any of these other guys, we might be like, okay, that was fine for year 1. We expect a year 2 leap, but we set the bar so high. But now again, after a dud kind of in week 2 and 11 targets in 2 games, there's a little bit of a panic there. And again, I think that the game script has been just a big issue here. So I'm not panicking yet on him. I still think there's reason to believe he could have a year 2 breakout. And again, if they're, I just mentioned Teteroa McMillan. Look at them. I mean, they were trailing in games, and McMillan was fine in those games, but then he piled up some points certainly in week 1 in the second half. That could be Harrison this week if they're trailing in that game. He could suddenly get 5 second half targets and score a touchdown and have 87 yards or something, and we're like, okay, there we go, eight or nine targets in a game. He's up to a 27% target share this season. As long as that continues, we're going to be fine. It's still very possible that could happen for Harrison. So again, if I have him on my team, I'm not trading him yet. I'm holding for now.
For sure. A player who feels like he's suddenly the most controversial player in football through 2 weeks, which I did not expect. Brian Thomas Jr., who apparently after 2 weeks decided he didn't want to get hit anymore. He decided that after a year where he was a superstar, better than Marvin Harrison as a rookie, with a first-round pick on a Jaguars team that had nothing to play for and had pretty bad quarterback play and pretty bad offense around him, if we're being honest, suddenly after a rough game where he was probably responsible for an interception, dropped what would have been a first down or could have been a first down to give the Jaguars the win in the fourth quarter, people are out on Brian Thomas Jr., systematically out almost. Like, oh, this guy does not have the toughness required to play professional football. Mike, maybe he's different. Maybe things have changed. Maybe he's frustrated. Who knows? But what I would say is this. What are the chances that Brian Thomas, who has 19 targets through 2 games, a great usage rate, is going to catch 5 of his next 19 targets? Because that's where he's at through 2 games.
Almost 0.
Yeah, like a horrific catch rate. I don't think that's likely to recur. I think the underlying usage, the underlying trust that Trevor Lawrence clearly has in him, and the first 17, 18 games of his career where he looked like he was a top 12, top 15 NFL wide receiver means more to me than one bad game in week 2. And I just don't buy the idea that he suddenly is no longer a NFL... He has NFL caliber toughness or the skills required to play wide receiver because of one rough game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the concern here, and this is something I did talk about in the offseason, is that, we have yet to see Brian Thomas play at an elite level with Trevor Lawrence. He was good last year, but he wasn't great until, believe it or not, Mac Jones was under center for the Jags. I'm not saying Mac Jones is better than Trevor Lawrence. I'm saying that he knew how to get the football to Brian Thomas Jr., and sometimes that's, all you're asking for from your quarterback, as we've seen. I think the best example of that's probably Minnesota with Kirk Cousins for a couple of years and Sam Darnold last year. And you know what? J.J. McCarthy hasn't been able to do that so far this season. We'll see if Carson Wentz can do that. That's going to really be key for that team the next couple of weeks. But we need to see that. I need to see Brian. And look, you made a good point, which is it's a 27% target share so far for Brian Thomas. That's a great number. If we sustain that going forward, he's going to be fine. Just the connection hasn't been there. The efficiency hasn't been there. And what we don't want is another kind of a season like Marvin Harrison had last year, where the target share could have been higher, but at the same time, the efficiency was so atrocious. It was just a lot of vertical shots, and he scored some touchdowns, but he ended up like 40th in fantasy points per game. We need more efficiency than that. We can't just have a 53% catch rate. We need it to be up higher to where it was last year. So there's a lot to figure out here. I do agree with you. He'll be better. He's still a super talented player. He's the number 3 scoring receiver as a rookie. I don't know if he'll get that high, but he could be 15, and you'll take that at this point in the season, if you drafted him. The problem is, Bill, this week, probably drawing the shadow from Derek Stingley Jr., and Stingley has shut down Mike Evans already this season, as well as Devontae Adams. He's done a nice job. I think they totaled 17 fantasy points in those 2 games, so I expect him to be all over Thomas this week. So this might not be the week. So if you're looking in fantasy and you want to trade for Thomas, I maybe would give it one more week.
Yeah, and certainly, this is not just a conversation about, okay, this guy is going to get fixed this week. Like, this is not a 1-week DFS conversation. I think we're talking about the big picture here about, over the course of the rest of the season, can these guys, pop up and be valuable? One thing I would be intrigued to see this week, and we'll talk about this matchup specifically, I wonder if we see more of Brian Thomas in the slot this week, which is not necessarily Derek Stingley's forte. He's played 30% of his snaps in the slot so far. 30%, 36 total slot targets so far. That could be a way to maybe get him away from Stingley. The Bucs seemed a little hesitant with Mike Evans. They really kind of kept him outside, but definitely not an ideal matchup. Derek Stingley is awesome, one of the top cornerbacks in all of football. Do you want to throw another one out there, Mike?
Sure. I think a natural one to go to as we're talking about wide receivers would be to stick with the position, talk about the Eagles wide receivers. That's obviously been a hot topic. Both of them are off to a slow start. Of course, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith I talked a lot last week about what happened in the opener, and I don't want to say the Eagles were surprised to see what Dallas did defensively, but to that extent, and compared to what they saw last year, it was different for them. And if we know anything about Jalen Hurts in this offense, they're going to take what the defense gives them often. It's very rare that they're just going to come out and try to enforce their will in some way. Last year, they faced too high at the lowest rate in the NFL. Saquon Barkley was obviously terrific, but they were ahead in games. They were competitive in games that gave him lots of opportunity. But A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith both had terrific seasons. In week one, Dallas played zone on almost every play. They were in too high at a rate the Eagles had not seen at all at any game last season. And they just decided, look, we're going to throw it to Dallas Goedert. We're going to hand it to Saquon, and we're going to let Jalen scramble. And it worked. They just, until the lightning storm, they couldn't be stopped. It was working just fine for them. Last week, it went kind of back to what we saw in the Super Bowl. It was a lot less, too high. The Chiefs did kind of their usual thing on defense, but that's a tough matchup to go into Arrowhead and throw the ball on them. So they did try, though. A.J. Brown had a 41% target share. Devontae wasn't terribly far behind. They just didn't need it. Again, they were just ahead in the game. Their pass volume's down a little bit from last season. And the other part of this is the Eagles, who are 2-0, have played Dallas and Kansas City, have not scored a passing touchdown yet this season. Last year was closer to half of their touchdowns. I think it was 58% run. So they'll be okay. As long as those big target shares keep coming. Smith, he'll be a wide receiver 3, we'll say, in fantasy. A.J. Brown should get back into the wide receiver 1 conversation. He's going to have his big games. And maybe that starts this week. I think there's an opportunity here against the Rams. They have a really, really good defense, but Keller Witherspoon is on IR. He's done probably for the season. They're a little shorthanded at corner. This could be an opportunity for Philly to open it up and get those guys the ball a little bit more. So, again, I'm not panicking on Eagles receivers. We've seen this before. They tend to be boom bust, and it just comes down to game script and scheme and kind of the defense they're facing. So I'm good with them, too.
Yeah, a little bit of bad luck, too. Jahan Dotson is the one who gets the 51-yard reception.
Good call, yeah.
Probably not likely to recur. I know Jahan Dotson dynasty owners are, hoping that continues to be the case.
Do they
I would say it's
still?
unlikely.
I don't know.
There's got to be a few. I'm in a pretty deep dynasty league. I think Jahan Dotson's on someone's roster somewhere. Maybe, again, we just talked about, I'm thinking about Devontae Adams, like a year 5 breakout. I don't think that's coming for Jahan Dotson, but someone out there still has the dream. But that if they line up differently, that could be Devontae Smith. That could be A.J. Brown on that play based on where they're lined up on that one particular snap, which is pretty meaningful in the course of 2 weeks and probably not meaningful in the course of 17 weeks. Like you said, no passing touchdowns. Devontae Smith last week caught a 50-50 ball inside the 5-yard line, pushed, almost scored. If he gets a couple more yards, if he bends his body slightly differently, that's a touchdown, and we're feeling entirely different about Devontae Smith after 2 weeks. How much stock, and this is, I think, maybe a year-to-year projection kind of question, and you've been doing the projections for us at ESPN for a while, so I'm interested in your viewpoint here. How long does it take for you to feel confident about the change from a coordinator to a coordinator or a play caller to a play caller? The Eagles moving from Kellen Moore to Kevin Patullo this year. They've had different coordinators every year, it feels like. But, how many weeks of seeing that new coordinator and how they call plays have to happen before you feel confident, okay, this is the new normal for how this team is going to run their pass run splits, all that stuff?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of stuff that I can't really... there's obviously so many metrics I'm projecting and so many elements that I try to build models to automate. And I feel like once we get through 4 games is when I feel like I could rely on that stuff a little bit. Obviously, at post week 1 is just chaos because there are so many new things we're learning, not to mention, target shares or usage or plays can be affected so much by a small sample, one game, the opponent, whatever it might be. A team just might run 43 snaps in week 1 and 70 in week 2. You have to consider that kind of thing. So I think that's probably the window where I start to feel a little bit more comfortable. If there's a drastic change, like game script adjusted play calling is something that I'm very focused on, every game. And you start learning, after week 2, pretty clear the Chargers have made a change. It's 2 straight weeks you adjust for game script. They're very pass heavy. They're the pass heaviest team in the NFL. So, that you start learning, but it's kind of like a percentage, your confidence starts to build as you add onto the sample. But I think usually that weeks 4 through 6, kind of in that window, is when I feel like we have a decent sample of normalized data that we can kind of work with.
Yeah, like a really good point. It's not a binary thing. Like you learn a little more
Right.
each week, and it's not like you go from not knowing anything to suddenly having perfect insight into a coordinator or a play caller. It is really something you learn as the year goes along. That's a really good point. I'll throw another wide receiver out there, and this is sort of informed by how we've seen his team play through 2 weeks, and that is Chris Olave and the New Orleans Saints, where the numbers have been fine. You know, if you have him on your team, you're not upset with what you've seen through 2 weeks, but the Saints have played at the fastest pace of any offense in football through 2 weeks. And by some metrics, it's not even close, I think. But they've been incredibly fast. They have thrown Chris Olave the ball a ton. He has 23 targets through 2 weeks. I think Juwan Johnson also has. Does he have 20 targets through 2
Yeah,
games?
Juwan is 20, 23 for Olave. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's, for a tight end to be on pace for 170 targets is an insane number. Chris Olave, I think, makes more sense. Obviously, the best receiver on that team, even though they keep trading for wide receivers every week, seemingly. But the pace really matters. He's had at least one. Last week, he ran a dino route that should have been a touchdown, was thrown just behind him. Should have been an easy score early in that game against the Cardinals. I think he had a near touchdown in week 1 as well, if I'm not mistaken, but at least one, not drop touchdown, but just slightly off touchdown from Spencer Rattler. Clearly the Saints comfortable throwing the football. And to your point earlier with Marvin Harrison, the Saints have not been blown out yet this year. They've been in close games each of the first 2 weeks. And no disrespect to the Saints, I don't see that happening every week. I think there's going to be some games where they are down multiple touchdowns in the second half. They are throwing a ton. And there's obviously the concerns about Chris Olave staying healthy. But, I do think that as long as he's on the field, Chris Olave is going to be in a really advantageous situation for getting targets and hopefully turning those targets into catches and touchdowns.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. So, as you know, I work with, expected play calling, touchdowns, fantasy points, yards, all those categories. Been doing that since back in the PFF days. And Chris Olave sits 4th in expected fantasy points among wide receivers so far. The problem is his expected total is 38, which trails just Malik Neighbors, Jamar Chase, and Devontae Adams, pretty darn good company. But he's 15 points below his expected. And actually 6th on this list is Brian Thomas, and he's minus 19. So those guys are just getting plenty of opportunity, but the efficiency hasn't been there. This is a tricky one. Oftentimes this stuff will regress to the mean, especially in the touchdown department. But once in a while they stick. And when they stick, it's generally because the offense is horrendous and they have terrible quarterback play. And that's the thing I'm running into with Chris Olave. Billy's 108 yards on 23 targets. That's 4.7 yards per target. And I'm not sure it's going to get much better. I mean, your quarterback's averaging 5.3 yards per attempt, terrible completion percentage. Spencer Rattler, I know he hasn't turned it over yet, but he was not very good last year. He's not playing particularly well this season. I know you said there was the close call, of course, with Olave, but I'm nervous about it. Again, these are the offenses that you tend to notice. It's like week 8, now it's week 9, now it's week 12, and it's still like the efficiency is not there and it's not coming back. I'm nervous about that with this offense. The good news is if you have Olave on your team, you got a discount because we kind of saw this coming after Derek Carr retired. You kind of took a shot in the middle round. You might not need to start him in 10-team leagues, maybe not in 12-team leagues, but it is tricky. It is tricky because I'm a chase the volume guy. I always am. Chase volume, love it. But this is one of those rare circumstances where I'm still really nervous that it might not matter. He might score 3 touchdowns and the efficiency just may never be there.
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess what I would say is, do I think he's going to be the 4th best receiver in football, even though he might have the 4th, highest expected fantasy points on a receiver in football? No, I don't think that's likely. But this was a guy who was going, 6th round in best ball drafts or so, like 5, 6 maybe? I mean, you don't have to be the 4th best receiver in football to pay off on that price. I think that's the thing is, there's a gap between maybe where he is now and where he will be, even if I totally agree with you and say that the lack of efficiency, the lack of reliability for the Saints at quarterback is not going to ever get better. It's one of those things like you want to chase it. And like, you're right. I mean, when it comes to projecting performance, if you're getting volume, I think that's the most important thing. And the guys I mentioned both have volume, but Trevor Lawrence has been iffy, okay at quarterback through 2 weeks. And Spencer Rattler is he's fun to watch. It is a fun, weird team to watch, but certainly not the most efficient or effective quarterback. So totally your point is taken there.
Yeah, we will, at the very minimum, we'll take them throwing the ball a million times. Maybe that'll save the day for some of these guys, but so far so bad in terms of efficiency.
Yeah. Do you want to give me another one here as we close things up?
Yeah, sure. I can almost do two here just together because it's the same conversation. O'Marion Hampton and Ashton Genty, the first round running backs.
That's where I was going too.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, we're on the same page. We can each take one. I'll take Hampton. Look, 11.6 fantasy points across 2 games so far, 3.1 yards per carry, 14 yards on 4 targets. It's just not happening so far. The snap percentage in week 1 gave me a lot of hope it would be fine, 81%, but that dropped to 62% in week 2. We saw a lot more Najee Harris. They both had 8 carries and 2 targets in that game. Hampton did still have a 34-19 snap edge in the game, had a 14-2 edge in routes run. So he's still the one. He just deferred more work to Najee Harris. Bill, I had a parlay last week, and it was 3 legs, and the last one I needed was O'Marion Hampton, and he had 3 straight goal line carries and did not get in. That was a tough one to watch. For sure. I felt like the process was good there, but not the execution.
No, I'm so sorry.
But again, the opportunity's still there for him to be a fantasy star. And they're playing Denver this week. And if you saw last week what happened there, Jonathan Taylor just, a cool 215 yards and almost 30 fantasy points in that game. So I'm holding out hope for Hampton. And, I'll let you kind of take it from there if you want to take the lead on Ashton Genty, but it's a similar story.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Taylor, by the way, what a role he's had for 2 weeks in that Colts offense. That is the dream scenario if you drafted Jonathan Taylor. I could talk about Genty. I'd also just stretch it out to the entire rookie running back class.
Sure.
I know that there hasn't been a ton of wild successes so far, and I think this is a sort of like a trick, like a memory trick for us as human beings when we think about football. Because if you think about the 2024 season, you're like, oh, well, should have had Bucky Irving. Should have had more Bucky Irving on my team. Should have had, more of some of these young backs. Bucky Irving had 84 yards through 2 weeks last year. You look at some of the other players who were league winners as rookies in their first 2 weeks. Jahmyr Gibbs had 59 yards. Nick Chubb had 35 yards. Alvin Kamara had 21 rushing yards. Even last year, Chase Brown, who was a second-year guy, 42 yards through 2 games last season. Chase Brown was an incredibly valuable player in the second half of fantasy football. Bucky Irving, same thing. Those guys, if you had them on your roster and you held them into October, November, they won you your league in December and in January. And I think that's the thing, is that we go through a fantasy football season, we forget what happened the first, not saying you, but saying in general, I think I do this, other people do this, the first 4, 5, 6 weeks of the year are kind of a total blur by the time you get to November and December and January. And we think about, we have those rookies, they're so valuable, we need them. Draft them over the summer, whether you're playing best ball, whether you're playing traditional fantasy football, you draft those guys, they stink for a couple weeks, or they don't have a big role for a couple weeks, and it's like, they're not going to hit. I screwed up. Some of those guys are going to come through. Cam Scadable's role increased last week. That's going to keep increasing most likely. Caleb Johnson, I know he has been very disappointing. Steelers did not take Caleb Johnson in the second round to bench him after 2 weeks and never give him an opportunity again. There's going to be stretches for him. There's going to be scenarios where he is a very valuable player down the stretch. Ashton Genty, one of the most impressive running back prospects coming into the NFL in a league where we know, even after last year, teams don't see running backs as incredibly valuable. The Raiders took him in the top 10. That is super meaningful and super valuable. I don't think, even though he's been really inefficient so far, I don't put that on him. I think, frankly, he's looked fine. To me, it has been a blocking issue. They've had some injuries up front. The Raiders still trying to figure out what they want to do on offense. They have not been in a positive... They were in a positive game script in week 1, I should say. But that was a really close game against the Patriots. It wasn't like they were up by a touchdown or 2 touchdowns for the vast majority of that game. They haven't been able to kind of just pound the rock. They'll have some opportunities to do that. They have a coach and an offensive coordinator who want to run the football. So a little disappointed with Genty in that, they took him out in the 2-minute drill. They had Dylan Lobby in the 2-minute drill. That's maybe a concern of mine. But I would just say the broader conversation with these rookie running backs is this. It doesn't feel good right now for a lot of them, unless maybe outside of Bill Krosky Merritt you feel pretty good about right now, and maybe a couple others. But be patient. There's going to be opportunities. Some of those veteran backs are going to go by the wayside. Some of these in a what is regarded widely as one of the best rookie running back crops entering the NFL in recent memory. Those guys are going to be meaningful down the stretch. It might not be everyone, but there are going to be 2 or 3 where at the end of the year, it's going to be like, wow, you needed that guy to feel really good about your team. And some of those guys are not going to have done much in week 1 and week 2.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, Genty, as bad as it's been, he's handled 30 of their 35 running back carries. We need more targets. He has an 8% target share and 3 receiving yards this season, so that obviously needs to change. That'll help us a lot. I think that'll come. But he has so little competition there. Zamir White and Dylan Lobby. I mean, come on, it's going to be the Genty show going forward. And yeah, I think that's you think about someone like Trevion Henderson, whose ADP skyrocketed at the last minute this year in drafts. Ramondre Stevenson, remember, there's a reason why they drafted Henderson in round 2. He got benched last year in favor of Antonio Gibson for fumbling. He could be 1 fumble away from Henderson handling 15 plus touches. J.K. Dobbins, his injury resume is so long. What if he goes down again? Then suddenly R.J. Harvey is a potential league winner. And there's plenty of examples of that. So I'm with you. Those guys, even if you're not prepared to start them now, don't panic. Don't sell low. Just keep them on your bench for right now. There's going to be, they won't all work out, but several will, I would imagine. So keep them rostered for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, it's not 100% success rate, but the ones who do hit, who you were able to get in the middle of your fantasy draft, and then who are running back, we're top 15 running backs by the end of the year, that is such a valuable proposition. That's the way you build a super team, is hitting on those guys who become incredibly valuable down the stretch. Mike, I could pick your brain all day about these guys. Like I said, I think one of the people I most respect, one of the smartest people in the industry, one of the people where, again, if I disagree with you on a player, I feel like, okay, Mike is right. I need to correct my thoughts. I need to double check this. Obviously, you're all over the place, but where can people check out the stuff you're doing each and every week for us at ESPN?
Yeah, well, if you keep, peppering me with all these kind words, this is going to be my home going forward.
Field doesn't do this for you? You need to get Field to giving you these intros.
Yeah, Field, so he's back and forth, it depends. I never know if he's going to jab me or say something nice. You never know with Field. But no, I feel the same. Obviously, you're one of the kind of guys, if you send out a tweet, I read every word of it and read all your content. So it's always fun to talk ball here. Fantasy Focus podcast. I'm on Wednesday through Friday, but the show's on every day. And of course, Fantasy Football Now every Sunday morning, 10 to 1 Eastern, generally on ESPN2, SportsCenter, EBL, all that fun stuff. We're keeping busy.
Mike's the best. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Take care.